Hit it. It's Hyperion time, baby. Drum roll, please. Hyperion. Welcome to my very first book review. Welcome to the channel. I hope you think it's a bit nice, but today we're going to be covering Hyperion. So, this was a book that's been recommended to me for a long time, but from a combination of stubbornness and wanting to read other things, I have neglected it for a very long time. And that is a shame because this book is delightful. I had a very good time reading it. One of those books that, you start to read and, you can get plot invested where, it's like, oh, cool, I want to see what happens. This is good. And then there's like, I can't put it down. What happens next? So this kind of fell into the latter stage of that sort of category. I had planned on just kind of reading through about 100 pages a day just so I could knock this out quick and sort of get a recording up. But I couldn't put it down. And I may or may not have neglected certain areas of my life in order to see what happens to the magical space opera people. So, general thoughts. So I actually tried to get into this book earlier, but the intro, they just kind of throw you in there, and so you're kind of bombarded with a bunch of scientific or sci-fi terms, and you're just thrown in there not knowing really what's happening, or it doesn't really get deep. So it has a bit of a weak beginning because I did put it down and not pick it up for months later until I had a physical copy of the book. But once it gets started, it really gets started. And it's not even like a not quick thing. Really, it's just I picked it up, got through the prologue, got a few pages in, and I was like, I think I'm going to read the new Jim Butcher book. And then just never came back to it until now. But it kind of has to do with the structure of the book. So it's very Canterbury Tales. You have a framing story of these group of people all sort of gathered together for an unknown goal. And, some spookiness happens where it comes out that they decide that, hey, let's tell each other our tales and we'll go into the life story of these, different main characters. But as you go through that, then that's when you actually get invested into the story itself. I was not a huge fan of their framing story, but once we started getting into the characters' heads and different POVs, that's, I think, where the book extremely shined. With these type of books, or with books in general, I have a pretty standard way that I recommend them. So if a book is okay, good plot, solid thing, and it's like hits a certain niche, then if someone tells me they're looking to read, let's say steampunk magic with a bit of a different sort of atmosphere, that's a very easy thing for me to recommend. The Aeronauts Windlass for like Jim Butcher. But while I'm reading it and I'm enjoying it, it's not on the same level to me as the Dresden Files. This book and certain books in the Dresden Files, you'll be reading through it and you're just really sucked in, and it becomes sort of something that you will conversationally hold people hostage with. If they like to read and they like sci-fi fantasy, then you're like, hey, you need to just drop whatever you're doing and just pick up this book now. And they might go, well, I'm actually reading this and I don't care. Pick up this book and read it now. I need to talk to someone about this. And this fell into that category for me. As I went through it and got really sucked into it, I was just kind of page turning and stuff. And the first story in there did such a good job of really drawing me in and wanting to understand what's happening that it kind of carried me through the rest of the book. Not all the stories are created equal, unfortunately. Some are stronger than others. And the way they ended it was a bit abrupt. But for what the book was and kind of standing on its own, I'd highly recommend it. I know it's a series, so I have really high hopes for it. My biggest pet peeve with like book series is if they start this strong that they can't carry it through. And I don't think that's the case because the book's been out for such a long time. I feel like it wouldn't be sort of as recommended as it was in there, but I'm going to review those books later and be able to kind of give you that info, like just based off my own experiences with it. But let's kind of dive into how this is all set up. So each different story, it really kind of is how the world building's done. You're not giving a lot of exposition or there's no real info dumps of just like, hey, here's what's happening. Instead, you have these different characters that have very different lives, different pros, different point of views that they're able to give you really distinct, memorable sort of stories and styles to, let you know what's actually happening in the hegemony and in the world at large. And this is a really big world. The actual story being told in like the entirety, it's taking place over a long number of years, and there is a sort of time travel in the book. So the just sheer scope of it is really wild. But the author did a really cool thing because by like sucking into each character and focusing on their own specific stories and showing how they all tie in together to like this grand sort of plot that he's building, it really kind of makes it up close and personal. And I was a huge fan of it. You start out in the beginning with this common cause, and you have a couple of things mentioned that they kind of put some hint on, let you know that it's important. And as you go through it, those things build and build in importance till you get to the very end, cut off abrupt, and you're just kind of sitting there like, I need to read the next book. What happens? The world building. Like as I said, they just kind of kick you right in there. So, you have to kind of be able to hit the ground running. As you go on, things will like make sense and stuff. And some people hate that. Some people want to know exactly what's happening as you're going. But I really like the process of discovery. As you get these different pieces and everything starts to click together. You think back to the older stories and stuff that was happening there. You're like, wait a second. Was that all part of the plot all along? And it's just like a really fun way to get through a story. I am so intrigued with what they're going to do forward because, you use that trick. Hard to do it a second time, especially with what has been set up. And I think I know it's supposed to change the sort of narrative, but a lot of people rate the second book even better. So that's already a high bar that they're going to have to cross. But to get into some spoilers. So I accidentally deleted my spoiler section, so I'm going to do it again. Basically, what I really wanted to dive into was some more of the specifics of the actual timelines. I don't want to ruin the series for anyone or have them start to anticipate certain things or have my own impressions. In fact, their view of the book. You very well might like different parts that I liked. So each individual story, I think they had their strengths and weaknesses, and you may very well like one more than the other. I was a huge fan of the first one, the priest story, and the poet story. Those were my favorite just based off personality and sort of what happens. The poet story is a little confusing. Really, I just like the way that one was written more, not necessarily the plot. But, you have all these different stories that sort of revolve around Hyperion and especially revolve around the Shrike. And the real spoiler thing I wanted to get into was how they handled sort of the displaying of the Shrike. Because they start out with, hey, here's this kind of in passing reference to this being that's alien that is being worshipped. And, sometimes it's referred as more of a monotheistic thing. Other people are like, hey, I'm a pagan, good enough for me. And each story just kind of either indirectly or directly touches the Shrike or Hyperion itself. So you start out with just kind of these glances, not really filled in monster, kind of off in the shadows. And as you go through each individual story, you see a different asset and a different sort of capability it can have. So it was a really spooky thing just to watch because in the priest story, the Shrike is sort of the leader of a cult of worship and is sort of hugging the savages and passing on the cruciform, which they never really explained what it was, except kind of a living parasitic thing that doesn't want to leave Hyperion. Then you have it, astral projecting into, the soldier's mind where, they Don't know if that is the Shrike or something else, but Kassad's super into it. So, long-term girlfriend turns out to be, an alien monster of unknown capability. It's a bit of a bummer. And then, you have the Scholar story, which I was a big fan of, where, his daughter starts, regression in age after coming into contact with the time tombs. And it's presumably that same Shrike monster that is having telepathic moral battles with the moral philosopher. So, funnily enough, he is having these Abrahamic debates with it. How can you justify your religion with like the sacrifice of Abraham? And the Shrike just keeps pushing and pushing, and this whole time he's watching his daughter regress and regress to a younger and younger age. And I thought that was just extremely well done. Certain ones I wasn't as big of a fan of. The Consul wasn't a huge fan of. The Detective I thought was okay. The main thing was I didn't like the framing story. Like, it was kind of a container that was pushing the plot forward, but it wasn't necessarily something that on its own stood super well, which was kind of disappointing, because the one kind of highlight of the framing story was you saw the Consul doing super cool things and kind of seemed like, the guy in the know. And then you get to a story, and it has some really big revelations for the series. I'll avoid just straight up spoiling those. But for me, it was a bit of a letdown seeing that character specifically not living up to what they put him up into their framing story. But all in all, it was pretty good. I am super excited to see what happens next. But to bring it back to me in the past, but, to kind of wrap things up and to welcome everybody back from the non-spoiler sort of section, I would recommend it. If you like sci-fi or fantasy of any genre, then or any subgenre within it, I think you should pick up this book if you haven't. There are enough subgenres and subplots in this book that there's something for you. I don't know if this series is going to continue in that vein of kind of having that wide of a scope or broad, but I'm assuming because you still have those characters in there, you're still going to have those multiple POVs and things where there's going to be a really cool, epic story happening from a bunch of different perspectives. Maybe one of those perspectives will go with you. On its own, I would give this book probably a 10 out of 10. Like, the book came out in the 80s, which blows my mind even better because it's so well done. But for me, this book is kind of up there for Dune. I definitely see the influence on some of my favorite series, like Red Rising. I know that was a big influence on, and I've seen other people sort of draw and pick similar stories and ideas directly like from there. So, the originality in it was just amazing. And I really need to see how the series plays out. If a series starts as strong but can't finish strong or finishes weaker, I'm generally really disappointed, and that will affect how I view the series as a whole and kind of my reflavoring of the books, because then it's just lost potential. But I think just based on what I know of Dan Simmons and some of his other work, I think he's going to pull it off. So I'm really excited to see how this all plays out and where it goes. So thank you for showing up. I appreciate it. This is my first video, so like and subscribe, please. I'm going to be posting weekly on Saturdays or Sundays. I'll figure out the posting schedule, but it will be once a week. And I won't be reviewing the next book right away. I'm going to go jump into some other stuff, but you can expect another review on the next book, at least within 30 days. So thanks, and see ya.